Hello everyone, Salam, Namaste, Adab, and welcome at Indian Diaspora, Washington, D.C. Forum. And now we invite Professor Ravi Sinha Saab for the rest of the time.
Thank you, Raji Saab, for having me. Thank you, Sunita, because when, as everybody knows, the clock runs fast when Raji Saab wears them. So I will launch right away into what I have to say. And like Sunita, I also have to begin with this disclaimer that I am no expert on how elections are won or lost. And maybe I will also shut my video in case there is some network problem, because I'm speaking from here in India. So I'm no expert on how elections are won or lost, nor can I claim any competence in deciphering an election result for what has worked and what has not. I will not be offering, therefore, any fresh insights into the results of recently concluded assembly elections in Karnataka beyond what is already well known from the media reports and analyses. I plan to focus primarily on the latter half of the title of the discussion today, namely the two contesting ideologies. The question of ideologies too is not easy to pose, let alone answer, especially when it comes to the muddy fields of politics on the ground. It is one thing to draw a clear ideological line on paper. It is quite another to do so on actual ground of politics. In normal course of politics, at least in a polity that has managed to settle into a normal course, ideological lines are seldom clearly drawn. Those who insist on drawing a clear ideological line in all circumstances are invariably pushed to the margins of the normal mode of politics. There are times, however, when politics must undergo a paradigm shift. Ideological battle lines are more or less clearly drawn under such conditions, and sometimes, even if rarely, revolutionary transformations ensue from such shifts. The ideological lines may or may not be clearly visible during the actual political turbulence itself, but one can decipher them in hindsight after the polity and society settles into a new normal. One cannot say that India today sits on the brink of a political paradigm shift that promises a revolution. In fact, a shift of decidedly regressive kind has taken place with the rise of Hindutva. Nearly a decade after 2014, it is clear now, at least to those who would care to see, what a disaster India has brought upon itself. The damage done to the economy, to the social fabric, to the institutions of governance, and to the democratic process itself is being felt in the bones of the country. India has been pushed back by decades in what has been at best a slow advance to a reasonably enlightened democratic republic with a moderately prosperous and not too uncaring an economy. It will take many decades to recover what has been lost in just one decade. And yet there is no guarantee that we will stop hurtling towards an even greater disaster in 2024. Under these circumstances, one should not be considered naive or conservative if one were to wish for a restorative kind of paradigm shift. One realizes now that merely turning the political clock back by a decade would bring a huge sigh of relief to the country. In times of disasters like this one, it is not a crime to hope for a kind of restoration, especially when revolutions are nowhere on the horizon. It is for this reason that the success of Rahul Gandhi's Bharat Jodo Yatra, followed by the resounding victory of Congress party in the Karnataka assembly elections, have come as a big sigh of relief and a desperately needed ray of hope in the aware citizenry, and to a significant extent, even among the suffering masses and oppressed communities across the country. One must, however, ask the question, has the Karnataka outcome resulted from clearly drawing an ideological line at the ground level? Disappointing as it may sound, the answer is largely in the negative. Actually, it should not be as disappointing as it sounds. As I said, drawing such a line in the muddy fields of electoral politics is not a simple or at times even a desirable thing to do. Insisting on this in all circumstances may in fact be counterproductive. One can, however, ask the converse question. Do these results shed some useful light on how to draw an ideological dividing line on the ground? The answer to this question is clearly affirmative, and I will be dwelling mostly on this apparently paradoxical situation. First thing to be noted in Karnataka outcome is that Congress, which confronted the BJP and the Saffron Brigade directly, did score a decisive victory, but it is far from the case that Hindutva has suffered a fatal blow. The BJP maintained its vote percentage of roughly 36% it had garnered in 2018. At this aggregate level of electoral analysis, the gains of Congress appear to have come at the cost of Janata Dal Secular, JDS, a regional party whose vote percentage has declined by the same 5 percentage points. Despite its name, which calls itself secular, this party has clearly moved closer to the BJP in the aftermath of the elections. But one should not rush to conclusions just on the basis of aggregate numbers. Congress has not won only because of its gains in the Mysore region where JDS has been strong. It has won most of the seats in northern Karnataka adjacent to both to the Telugu states and to Maharashtra. It has made gains in the rural areas all over the state. The point to note, however, is that not only has BJP maintained its aggregate vote percentage, it has also made gains in many areas. It has gained ground wherever communal divide has been pronounced and wherever Hindutva is entrenched. In the coastal region of Udupi, Mangalore, it has stood its ground and even improved its vote percentage. Same is the case with the urban conglomerate of Bengaluru, where it has won 15 out of 28 seats. Spectacular is the case of a place called Srirangapatna, where its vote share skyrocketed from 6.4% in 2018 to 22.8% in 2023. This is the place where an intense communal campaign is on around claims of yet another mosque being a temple. It will be foolhardy to think that Hindutva has lost its ground in Karnataka. A telltale sign of the hold of Hindutva was in the episode of Bajrang Dal and Bajrang Bali, when none other than the Prime Minister himself equated the hooligans with the monkey god and sought help from the muscle power of one and the blessings of the other. Many across the country laughed at this mockery. And yet, it was not a laughing matter. Many leaders of Congress bent over backwards to put on display their religious credentials. Even D.K. Shivakumar, a key architect of Karnataka victory, made well-publicized visits to temples, and Congress campaigners began to count on how many Hanuman temples Mallikarjun Kharge, the Congress president, had built in his native Hyderabad region of Karnataka. Those who knew the situation on ground and those who knew a thing or two about how elections are won or lost in India did not take this matter lightly. In the electoral analyses splattered across the media, the victory of Congress has been attributed to multiple factors, but three among them stand out. The so-called anti-incumbency of an exceptionally corrupt government, first. Second, the economic hardships of the poor, who are a vast majority of the population, like everywhere else in India. And third, a relatively strong organizational presence of the Congress party in Karnataka. Such analyses also factor in roles of vote banks supposedly based on castes and communities like Lingayats, Kaligas, Kunbis, Dalits, Muslims, and so on. But managing such vote banks is a necessary detail of any electoral strategy, often expressed in the euphemistic phrase of social engineering. It does not define an ideological dividing line. If one tries hard to extract some such line from the enormous complexity of Indian politics, two large conglomerate of factors stand out. On the one hand, Hindutva, cultural nationalism, religious and other traditional identities. And on the other hand, the second conglomerate of issues is that of poverty, class, basic security of life, and material well-being of people. Given the history of 20th century, class has been the centerpiece of the canonical definition of ideological dividing line. Many who swear by this definition and reject the possibility of any other definition would underline the fact that Karnataka election was won because the poor, especially in the rural hinterlands, supported Congress. While this underlines the fact that class factor hasn't gone anywhere, it does not explain a far more effective presence of the other factors. As I have already mentioned, the victory of Congress does not mean that Hindutva has been defeated in Karnataka, and it is not the case that poor have voted for Congress because they detest Hindutva. Fact of the matter is that there seem to exist two different axes along which ideological dividing line can be drawn in today's politics. The class axis has been the canonical one, but there seems to be another axis. For want of a better nomenclature, let me call it the cultural axis. It includes identities based on religion, caste, race, ethnicity, community, languages, and even civilizations. This axis has become far more operational in the area of democratic and electoral politics. Actually, part of the question can be posed even more sharply. Why is it that the ever-present class axis almost never gives rise to a politically operational class identity? And we can raise the same question about the gender axis too, even if in a different way. As many a leftist trade unionist would testify, the class that comes together on the factory floor seldom remembers the class identity and solidarity in the voting booths. Here, I would not even try to get into the high theory of relationship between class and culture. For the purpose at hand, I will take a pragmatic tack and treat these two realms as relatively autonomous, even if connected at some deeper subterranean level. The rise of culture in politics is not confined to the so-called third world. Samuel Huntington, the Harvard Don famous for his Clash of Civilizations, can easily be chastised by other dons of the progressive kinds, especially after he showed his true colors by prodding the Americans to ask the question, who are we? And encourage them to be wary of the Latino immigrants who pose a threat in his reckoning to the American national identity. Chastising him is the easy part. But how does one explain the rise of Donald Trump in American politics, which has happened more or less along the same lines Huntington theorized? Trumps do not arise because the likes of Huntington construct their theories. The sources of Trumpism lie in the deeper layers of American society. Similarly, the political traction of Hindutva arises, at least in parts, from the deeper layers of the Indian social mind. To add to the puzzle and to the tragedy, democracy itself, especially of the fiercely competitive kind, plays a role in bringing the worst out of the hidden layers of the social mind. Who in the world can claim to have a better alternative to democracy? And yet, there are examples galore of democracy landing itself in very strange places. The example of Hitler coming to power through democracy may sound hackneyed, except that the phenomenon is far more ubiquitous in the world today. You in the United States had your Trump, and I am told that Trumpism hasn't gone away anywhere. We in India have Narendra Modi. Turkey just re-elected Erdogan, who has been in power since 2003, first as prime minister and subsequently as president. Bolsonaro of Brazil was barely defeated. Putin is too well known an example to forget. One can go on and cite examples where democracy finds furious ways to commit suicide. But one thing would be common in all such examples. The cultural axis plays a crucially important political role. In saying all this, I am aware of the fact that the cultural axis does not become operational on its own in the political arena. Popular democracy with competitive elections is not exclusively a cultural phenomenon. After all, the whole exercise is for constituting a state and electing a government for running an economic and a political system. This system constitutes itself in the political arena and ostensibly operates in that arena, but competitive electoral processes force it to dig into the cultural unconscious of the social mind. In analogy with depth psychology, I often describe it as depth politics. The cultural unconscious of the Indian social mind, whose layers have been deposited over centuries and millennia, becomes operational in modern politics through competitive electoral democracy. In the case of United States, one often hears about the deep state that pulls the wires of democracy while itself remaining beyond the reach of constitutional and democratic powers and procedures. In India, the deep state may not be as deep, but it is definitely there, and the existence of a cultural unconscious comes very handy to it. In fact, the Indian deep state does not feel the necessity to remain invisible and confined to the depths. There are examples galore of unconstitutional, undemocratic, and unscrupulous acts on the parts of the political as well as the economic forces and agents. All that is being done to the economy, to public resources, to the constitutional and democratic institutions is not very hidden. But the point to note is that a state, whether deep or otherwise, finds it handy to manipulate the cultural unconscious, and democracy itself becomes an accomplice in this exercise. Michael Walger, the Princeton political philosopher, has drawn attention to another curious phenomenon in which I suspect cultural axis is deeply implicated. In his book, The Paradox of Liberation, he points out examples of national liberation movements that led to independence from foreign rule and to establishment of secular, liberal, and enlightened democracies. But within a few decades, the secular revolutions made way for religious counter-revolution. The irony is that counter-revolutions were brought about through the same democratic process which had been instituted by the founding fathers for the purpose of erecting a secular, democratic, and enlightened republic. India figures prominently in Walger's paradox. Although being a large and complex country, the replacement of quote-unquote revolution by quote-unquote counter-revolution has taken its time. It took half a century after the departure of Jawaharlal Nehru for someone like Narendra Modi to come to power and replace the Nehruvian hegemony with the hegemony of Hindutva. In saying all this, my purpose is to underline the obvious that is often ignored by those who are accustomed to drawing the ideological dividing line across the class axis alone. The dividing line on the actual ground of politics cuts across both the axes of class and culture. In the rough and tumble of competitive electoral politics, one is no wiser if one can prove that one is a derivative of the other. If class were to be the only operational axis, the left would have conquered the world rather easily. On the other hand, if culture were to be the only operational axis, it would become impossible to ward off the ascendance of the right wing. Fortunately, this is not the case on ground. Even the Sangh Parivar cannot live by Hindutva alone. Even Narendra Modi has to see beyond the Hindu-Muslim divide and at least talk about Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas. It is in this light that the lessons of Karnataka should be read off. By and large, the cultural axis was tilted against Congress, while the class axis was tilted in its favor. The art of drawing an ideological line on the actual ground requires navigating the political topography along both these axes. Congress managed to do this in Karnataka this time. The BJP lost primarily because the class axis became steeply tilted against it. Hardships faced by the poor had been greatly exacerbated by corruption and misrule. One should not, however, read too much into the relative importance of class in this Karnataka example. As I have mentioned already, Hindutva has not disappeared from Karnataka. Congress managed to hit the sweet spot because it could take advantage of the class dimension without hurting itself along the culture axis. This situation can be contrasted with a hypothetical situation if the left were to be the principal opponent of BJP. An equally strong left would not have fared as well as Congress, mainly because left does not know how to navigate itself along the cultural axis, which is tilted too steeply against it in most places on the subcontinent. At the same time, one should not take the eyes off the absolute necessity of drawing a clear ideological line. In the situation that has arisen in India after nearly a decade of Modi rule, this has become a must even for electoral battles. Given the importance of two axes and the unevenness of political topography, such a line must not be straight, but it must be clear. One can see its importance in the example of the Janata Dal secular debacle. It failed to take up a clear ideological position and planned for winning enough seats through its traditional influence and regular vote bank politics to be in the position of a kingmaker. This tactic has worked in the past, but it backfired in the present situation. People were wary of its lack of ideological commitment. Beyond uplifting the morale of forces opposed to Hindutva, and in addition to appearing as a ray of hope in the distressing political atmosphere in India, Karnataka results also have reasonably clear lessons for the all-important battle of 2024. But there are no strong indications that these lessons are being learned by the entire opposition. In the loud clamors for opposition unity, parties and leaders are adopting negotiating positions as if they are already on the table for seat sharing. Everyone seems to be angling for the largest piece of the opposition cake. There are talks of putting up one candidate of united opposition against each BJP candidate. There is much advice to Congress to be large-hearted and make sacrifices for the sake of opposition unity. The obvious necessity of drawing a clear ideological line is getting lost in this noise of opposition unity. There are only two political forces with a relatively unblemished record of fighting against Hindutva, the Congress and the left. The record of every other force is tainted in varying degrees. Some have been confused or short-sighted, while there are many who have been downright opportunists. There are problems with the two resolute fighters too. Left, as mentioned already, has been especially inept at fighting along the axis of culture. This adds to its handicaps arising out of other ailments such as dogmatism, sectarianism, or even unthinking populism. Congress, on the other hand, is a much larger political force, but it also has much bigger problems. Given its long and complicated history and its more recent omissions and commissions in the political arena, it cannot entirely be absolved from accusations of paving the way for Hindutva. It has often functioned as a halfway house between secularism and Hindutva, and has had leaders and cadres who can cross over to the other side without batting an eyelid. Congress has never been a shining example of a clear ideology or a cadre-based party. And yet, things have been changing for the better in recent months and years. There has been much internal churning, and Congress has emerged as the central force around which all other anti-Hindutva forces could be mobilized for the battle at hand. Emergence of Rahul Gandhi as an ideological leader and a resolute fighter has been a turning point in the recent history of Congress. Bharat Jodo Yatra had changed the political atmosphere in the country. And yet, Rahul's Congress is not in a strong enough position to bring about an ideological unity among the disparate political forces of the opposition. The problem is further complicated by the fact that many of the regional parties stand to lose if Congress gains ground in their part of the country. Nearly everyone wants Congress to be strong elsewhere, but weak or non-existent in their own areas. People like us cannot really chart out the course for the opposition in India. We are neither at the drawing board nor at the negotiating table. All we can do is to have a reasonable wish list. But we have to be receptive to the complexity when it comes to larger strategies. One corner of India is so different from another. In Kerala, for example, where Congress and left are faced with each other, it will be all right if they continue to be at each other's neck, provided they keep the door shut for BJP. In West Bengal, on the other hand, it is not unthinkable that Congress and left together fight against Mamata Banerjee's TMC, but in such a way that they snatch the ground from BJP and become the main opposition to TMC. In that part of India, this may be the most effective way to fight BJP at the national level. There are other parts of the country where, for example, opposing BJP by putting up one unified opposition candidate in each constituency will be tantamount to ensuring that BJP gets more than 50% of the votes. One could go on and on about the complexities of India's political geography. An ideological line must be drawn, but we cannot expect it to be very straight. We should expect Congress to play the lead role in the battle at hand, and yet we should not expect it to bind its hand and feet with ideological ropes in such a way that it becomes as ineffective in fighting the real battle against Hindutva as, for example, left has become. In the end, we should also remember that fascists may come to power through elections, but they are not very amenable to being dislodged from power through elections. January 6th in the United States had a happy outcome thanks to the relative robustness of American institutions. The Indian analog of January 6th would more likely be a death knell for Indian democracy, which is already under a great deal of stress. On that depressing note, let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Ravi Sahab, अब आप अपनी शक्ल दिखाएं जी. Yeah, all right, thank you. And we had a mixed message from you, but nonetheless, the end result of Karnataka and the rise of Congress for a while is the positive sign, and
yes,
hopefully that is going to be a good fight for the near future, and we'll see what happens.
Thank you, Razi Bhai, and thank you all the speakers for wonderful ideas. And let's move on to the question and answer session. And it is heartwarming to see that there are so many comments because we are very politically active. And
yeah, I think there was an issue. I couldn't unmute myself. Yeah, thank you for taking my question. I think my question is same. This is happening since 2014, right? Why it is taking so long for the people to understand and change this narrative of BJP? It's been 9 years. I know Karnataka, and people think there are more educated people in Karnataka, but you can see that more educated people are still supporting BJP. There is still following what Narendra Modi is doing it. Modi and Shah, there are two people running this entire country. So does it take that long to people to understand? Like it took 9 years.
Please go ahead and be brief.
Thank you, Sunita ji, and thank you, Professor Sinha Sahab. Always incisive, always informative, always illuminating. My brief question has to do with the perceived concomitance of politics and ideology. The Karnataka election, and I speak as a former member of the Karnataka Legislative Assembly, really had very little to do with ideology. It was fought on the basis of issues, on the basis of what was in the public good. my question to you is this. If you are an advisor to the Congress I party, advisor to Rahul Gandhi, what advice would you give him? Because when you look at ideology, any ideology, when it is applied to the matrix of human affairs, necessarily becomes muddy and one has to compromise. So let me put you on the spot and benefit from your wisdom. What advice would you give him? What advice would you give me if I was running again for election in Tumkur, Karnataka?
Then Ravi Saab, you can continue, no problem.
I just, briefly take up, two very difficult, large questions. Satyanath Chaudhary have wondered about why it is taking so long for Indians to realize what Modi is and what Modi has done. I am of the other opinion. I think it is happening quite fast. It is one thing for us to sit and argue with each other and convince each other. That can happen in an hour or in a day or in a year. But to convince a country of 1.4 billion, the historical process, the political process takes time. There was the Nehruvian hegemony when he was around, and now that has been replaced by Hindutva hegemony. And that took almost 25 years between 1967 and the 90s to be replaced. There was a very long transition. So earlier Congress used to win elections easily because it was Congress party, had led the national movement, had leaders like Gandhi and Nehru, people, whoever voted, generally they automatically voted for Congress. When the democracy became competitive, when Congress hegemony for various reasons, that one cannot easily go into evaluating. It is easy to criticize Congress, but one has to see what kind of complex country and society we live in. For whatever reasons, when Congress hegemony declined, then democracy became competitive. And when democracy became competitive, there would be necessarily, if not BJP, somebody else who will dig religion out of the Indian mind and bring it into the political arena. That is what political theorists and philosophers talk about in many third world countries, where, after democracy becomes operative, then these demons come out of the minds of the society. So these things take time. I am not surprised that it has taken time. It may be very clear to us that Modi is a disaster, but he came to power not because, people thought he was a disaster. He came to power because Indians thought that he will make a paradigm shift in Indian politics. So that it took a lot of 100 years or 70 years of RSS work and lot of political turmoil in the period of transition between Nehru and Modi for Modi to come to power. So it takes time. About advising Rahul, I will not really venture to do that. He is doing very well. It is easy to advise. He's sitting here and we intellectuals can advise anybody, but the political turf in India is a tough place, and it is not, he is doing quite well. He's doing quite well. His principal job is to draw the zigzag of ideological line. The ideological line in India will necessarily be zigzag, and he has done it very well, Now, nitty-gritty of winning elections, that no individual or no leader can do. For that you have to put in place an election fighting machine, which BJP has managed to do, or this duo has managed to do. Congress has not been able to do that. That will be a tough ask, and we cannot advise on that count. The political ground at the ground level is a very murky place, and it is easy for intellectuals to advise to big leaders that do this and do that, that is easier said than done. So I will stop at that and wait for other questions.
Thank you, Ravi sir.
Particularly for Sunita ji, comment that he did not mention anything about Muslims. And if he had said anything about Muslims other than saying minorities, which indicates kind of Muslim, and they would twist it every which way and say things that he's what they say some well, I forget about the word. So I say that he has very deftly and very wisely grasped this social justice issue and wholeheartedly embraced it, which may annoy a lot of most of the, in fact, 99.9% of the upper caste, but they constitute only 10% of the population. And social justice would be beneficial for all of the rest, including Muslims. One should not forget, a lot of Muslims do not support my enthusiasm for social justice because they think, oh, he's talking only about Dalits or CST. It includes, social justice includes Muslims.
Okay, so we will come back to Mujib Saab. In the meantime, let's move on to Rashid Sheikh Saab.
Thank you. Yeah, Rashid Sheikh. Thank you very much. It's a very interesting conversation. I'll be very brief. First, I agree with Sunita regarding her criticism of Rajiv's on not saying the word Muslim. And let's not forget that Congress in its own time has played plenty of communal politics. But that was a comment. My question is, with the specter of Rajiv possibly being imprisoned, what would happen to
Rashid
so I was just basically finished. So what would happen to opposition unity should Mr. Gandhi be put in jail?
Okay, and your question is directed to both of these people.
Well, actually, Ravi or to anyone, to Mujib Ji Sahab also, but especially to Ravi.
Okay, Ravi Sahab.
Before it will be a very difficult situation. Anything can happen in today's India. So Rahul can be put in jail. We hope not. And if he is put in jail, it sounds perverse to say, then the struggle will become far more intense against Modi. You know? So probably it will not go to that extent. But my point, the way Rashid started about what Congress did or did not do in past and how they, Rahul, Rashid was saying Rajiv, but he meant Rahul, I think, yeah. So
yes,
Rahul
I'm sorry.
does not,
yeah.
Rahul does not mention the word Muslim and all that. That is not a fair criticism. Let us not go on what words are spoken or not. Congress party has been the only large electoral political parties which openly criticized release of all those rapists of what is her name, the famous Gujarat case, when those rapists were and murderers were released. Bilkis Bano case, yeah. So for the Congress party, especially the Rahul kind of Congress party, is very clear about secularism. Of course, they have to fight a vicious propaganda. Whenever they utter a word, they are projected as appeasers of Muslims, supporters of terrorists, being themselves, foreign, people, not of Indian soil, and so on. So one has to realize the complexity of the situation. We cannot put our words in their mouths. They are fighting a very tough battle. And I am positive that, he stands on the side of all oppressed communities, and Muslim community is the most oppressed community in India today. He stands by that community. There is no doubt. So let us not, and what Congress has done in past, I myself pointed out that many in the Congress have been halfway house to Hindutva. They can easily walk over. Congress has had this very tough time, even in Gandhi's and Nehru's time, even in national movement time, when very big leaders and large number of leaders in Congress were more fit for RSS. There were people like Madan Mohan Malviya, and there could be many names, Rajgopalachari even later on. There were right-wingers, they were, very close to Hindutva kind of ideology and so on. So Congress had that problem. And that is a very controversial subject of history. One can talk about that Indians could not be mobilized in national movement without Gandhi's bringing religion into politics. So, it is more a comment on our society that Gandhi could not become Gandhi, and he could not have mobilized the entire country against the British had he not become a Mahatma of some kind, had he not brought political language. Otherwise Indians were not ready to be mobilized in a modern political project. So who do we blame? I mean, in a way, Gandhi succeeded in politicizing the entire Indian population for the first time in thousands of years. And yet the way he succeeded has left an aftermath, that is very troubling for us, So India is that kind of difficult place, and I evaluate Congress or Nehru or whoever, the leaders of my choice in this context of India being a very difficult society. So
thanks, Ravi. Actually, I was really more interested in your thoughts on what would happen were he to be imprisoned.
Two things I can speculate. I mean, I don't know. I don't understand Indian society and politics that well, that how will Indian people respond to Rahul being put in jail? I can't say. Maybe he will not be as easily forgotten as an Anant Tumde or as a that student from JNU, I'm forgetting the name, Omar Khalid. He will not be forgotten as easily. There will be a large scale movement, hopefully, if he is put in jail. But who knows, people do forget, or maybe, you see right now, the Olympic medalists, are fighting, and there was some commotion, some movement, but, maybe, the regime will have its way. So it is difficult to speculate. One thing I can say, that if Rahul is put out of the picture, then there is no question of any opposition unity of electoral political forces. There is no chance of any opposition unity to Hindutva in the absence of an ideological Congress. And Congress has never been ideological, but now under Rahul, for the first time, it is moving in that direction. It is becoming ideological. And this ideological Congress has to be the center pole around which any kind of systematic or consistent opposition unity can happen. So there are good reasons, if I were to think on behalf of the regime, there are good reasons to put Rahul in jail, provided it does not give rise to large scale upheaval. So because if Rahul is put in jail and is put out of the scene, there is no question of any systematic opposition unity, and hence there is no question of BJP getting defeated.
Alok Tandon sir.
There are two other questions.
Am I audible?
Yes.
No, but then you freeze very frequently.
Yeah, thank you for giving me time to ask. My question is to Dr. Ravi Sinha. I go along with his analysis to a large extent that there are two axes. One is class and another is culture. Now the question is how to deal with this cultural unconscious in Indian society, so that the other question was that how to convert those very well educated persons to come out of this Hindutva ideology, because that Hindutva ideology is basing itself on the cultural unconscious. So we must elaborate what is cultural unconscious, what are the elements of that, that is the religious, historical, and others, and how to intervene in that debate. I think this is a very relevant question, because the way left has dealt with this question.
Well,
Tandon Sahab has a very
question for Ravi Sinha.
Yes, very, very difficult question. But I am responsible for igniting that question, by this terminology, cultural unconscious, it will take a long time to go into that kind of theoretical debate. Let me just say that from our side, from the progressive side or secular side, left side, whichever word you pick for yourself or for me, for our side, there has been a simplistic understanding about the problem of communalism. We often say that communalism is there because of this or that mistake of this or that political force, that Nehru should have done this and Congress should have done that, and okay, it is okay as far as it goes. But we have not come to terms with the fact that, we had, at the time of independence, we had partition in which 1 to 2 million people were killed, 10 to 20 million people were displaced, and we haven't come to terms with that. It becomes very uncomfortable to raise this question. After all, whoever conspired to divide the subcontinent, into 2, now 3 countries, did people at the helms, did the British, did the Muslim League, did Congress Party plan those huge killings where people killed people? Not that the British were killing people, not that like the Sangh Parivar Congress was organizing the pogroms or riots. People killed people. Why did that situation arise? We have to ask ourselves, and the answers are not just in what the political forces did or did not do. Most, if you look at the globe, it is very uncomfortable question for us. Where are communal riots or ethnic riots, suppose are more likely to take place? In much of the third world, in our country, in India, it happened in Rwanda. So if you put a map on the wall and see where people are likely to kill people, of course, incited by political forces, or very malignant political forces, but where people are ready to kill people, we have come to terms with that part also. So when we analyze the situation, we should not just look at the political agencies, political parties. We should also look at the playing field. The playing field in India is tilted against secular forces. Playing field in India is heavily tilted against progressive, enlightened forces. It is much easier to incite that kind of hatred than to inspire people for, as Rahul Gandhi will say, love. So बाजार जो है वो नफरत का है, एक आध दुकान मोहब्बत की खुल जाएगी. So that is the challenge we face in our society. And before we castigate this or that secular force, we activists, assembled here, many of kind, we do not realize that our activism makes us either simplistic or blind to the larger political reality. We start preaching to each other that let us do this and let us do that. Let us be the change and so on. But that does not explain the very large place called India, 1.4 billion people, a very long history. So to make it short, we'd say it's a difficult question. The cultural unconscious, it's a metaphor. There is no social mind. We know that there is only individual mind. Nature has given rise to mind only in the individual body. So when we talk of social mind and cultural mind and national mind, and these are all metaphors. So if we use the metaphor of social mind, we can further the analogy and say that there are deeper layers of that social mind which has accumulated through sometimes millennia. Some layers are accumulated through millennia of history, some of them through centuries of history, and some of them through last 6, 7, 8 decades, including partition, including all the riots that were engineered for very small political gains. Very bad things were done on a very large scale, which keeps on happening even today in India. So all that goes into the cultural mind. All that gives rise to animosities that die very, they don't die easily. And if we don't keep that nature of the political field, the social structure itself, we keep on saying that, oh, RSS spoiled it, otherwise Hindus and Muslims have always lived in peace and together, have never fought. Then they will say that, oh, we were always great, before the Muslims came and they spoiled our great civilization. And we progressives will say that we were always great, but the colonials came, the British came and spoiled the whole thing. So we always come to these simplistic explanations. History is not that simple.
Thank you. And the next person is Tariq Farooqi Saab. Razi bhai, can you please check if Harbans Mukhia Saab is still there, or is he logged in by different name?
Quite late. We are quite late. I guess he left.
Okay. Yeah, I couldn't check him, but
thank you, Rafat, for doing such an excellent job, and thank you all the speakers. Actually, my questions have been answered by Mr. or Dr. Ravi Sinha, and excellent analyses. As an Indian Muslim, whether Rahul says Muslim or not is not that important, because I think most Muslims in India will be happy with an incremental, step-by-step approach, given where we are. Even if we get back to some sense of normalcy, if there is some control over the 24/7 saturated media spread of poisonous material day in and day out, that would be a big improvement from where we are. So I think most of the Muslims, as long as they can live in India with some peace and dignity, would be more than happy. And I think it's just not practical for Rahul to go and completely embrace everything and say everything openly, because it is not good politics. And how will it help Muslims if the Congress party cannot even win a majority? So, if the majority assumes that it has become a Muslim party and doesn't vote for it. So excellent analysis. And we are, we take the incremental approach. Not everything was rosy pro-Modi, and not everything will be rosy post-Modi, but it can be better. Thank you.
Thank you, Tariq sir. Razi bhai, anyone else to call upon, or you take it back? Unless I missed someone.
Syed Amir Sahab had raised hand.
Oh, okay. Wish to. Amir bhai, please go ahead. Razi bhai, please check.
Thank you. One question comes to my mind is based on a very limited exposure to the speeches, talks of Rahul Gandhi. Is there a factor or some problem in Rahul Gandhi comes across as a very sophisticated, cultivated person? He speaks English well and probably Hindi, Urdu also well. But he is in different categories certainly than Indian Prime Minister at the moment. Is there a disadvantage by the way he comes across? We can see if we go back, the Mahatma Gandhi became Mahatma and a big leader after he adopted the Indian attire and the Indian ways, and he resonated with the ordinary person. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, on the other hand, was very westernized, but his powerful intellect connected to the Indian masses. Now, in case of Rahul Gandhi, do you think that he has some disadvantage, or are other people in Congress besides him who, which I am not aware of, who are can connect better with Indian masses or resonate better with them? And is that a disadvantage? And he comes much more in alignment with intellectuals in our own community, as we can see here, Ravi Sinha Saab and people like him who are intellectuals and seculars, but are a minority. Thank you.
Anyway, after Ravi Sinha Saab, maybe I can respond on this.
No, I think Amir Sahab has raised a very important question. Yes, Rahul has an handicap. Rahul has an handicap for, what should I say? I don't know English that well, for the wrong reasons or for the right reasons. He has this handicap of being very knowledgeable, very sophisticated, very civilized. And that becomes a handicap, when it comes to the rough and tumble of electoral politics in India. So Congress party or whoever does politics in India will have to have a structure which has all kinds of people. So there will be other people in Congress probably will be groomed. People often give the example of Rahul's sister, herself, Priyanka, that she connects better with when it comes to connecting with the masses, So that once you have the ideology and strategy in place, which only Rahul can do, not Priyanka, then Priyanka can do the job and take the word to the people. That kind of, I'm just giving a crude example, but that kind of political structure will have to be built by Congress. But you are absolutely right, that, I forgot to say something with the earlier question, but that relates to what you are raising. What is to be done about it? The thing is that when the cultural field is tilted against all right-thinking people, secular people, progressives, then what is the hope? The hope is that 75 years ago, a constitution came into existence, a modern republic was instituted. The hope is that Nehru planted something on this very difficult soil, and so let me call that the modern republic, modern democracy. For want of a better word, let me just call it modernity. The people have to stand on the ground of modernity to challenge the malignant forces along the axis of culture. And that is a tough fight, because the way the cultural axis is tilted against modernity in India, against democracy, against rule of law, against rights of individuals, communities, society itself runs roughshod over rights of individuals, starting from the family. So the way the culture is itself tilted against good politics, only hope we have is that whatever institutions we have been able to build, whatever modern ideology we have been able to bring into our society, at least people will say that the law should be same for everybody. At least people will say that, okay, maybe there will be some people who will be stinking rich, but I should be able to live my life, with, reasonable security and with reasonable amount of dignity. So these things will have to be mobilized against this traditional kind of culture, which often activists also play the same game. They say that, people are behaving this way because we have not been able to go to the people. We are not working hard. Sunita was just saying that we haven't inconvenienced ourselves other than those people who are sitting in jail. She has a very simplistic view. Okay. Each one of us we are inconveniencing ourselves.
Mujib Sahab also wants. Yeah, Mujib Sahab also wants.
Not everyone has to go to jail. And everybody should be ready to go to jail, but that is not the goal. We are not here to win some prizes as an activist. We are here to understand a problem, and we are here to find a way. And finding a way is based on the kind of modern India that came out of national struggle, that came out of Ambedkar and Nehru kind of modern views of a republican constitution. If we can make that as the plank of electoral politics, then we can fight to some extent against religion being a plank of politics.
Thank you. Mujib.
Thank you so much for letting me speak. And I really enjoyed the thing. And Ravi being a very, very old friend, I'm not saying it because of that. I found his summary of the Karnataka election and how to go forward very, very helpful. And really excellent summary. I just want to make two quick comments. One, I do want to disagree slightly with Ravi, that he says Congress has now become an ideological party. Before Ravi's time, when I was young, there was a definite Nehruvian ideology for development of the country and so on and so forth. And so I would say it was ideological once. And the other thing this is speaking as somebody whose knowledge of Hindi Urdu is very, very minimal. The slogan that somebody repeated recently in this program of what Rajiv said, what Rahul said after the Karnataka election, two words that in his slogan, Nafrat and Muhabbat, I think of them as Urdu words, not as traditional Hindi words. And so I think the choice of words by Rahul is deliberate. And I think he said conveyed something by doing that. I think that we should really not try to nitpick what he's doing. He's really doing great work. Thank you.
Okay, Fazal Khan sir.
My question is directed to Ravi Sinha sir. First, let me say that you are one of the few leaders that who tried to touch the reality of partition and what happened afterwards. My question mainly is to what difference does it make if constitution is changed, tilted towards Hindutva for the majority community? Because that's what the slogan is, and it is well known that RSS never agreed with the constitution when it was put together. So what difference does it make? And what I have seen, nowhere in the world, with few exceptions probably, that majority community does not defend the constitution. It's a minorities defend the constitution. Even in the United States, if you look at it, same Hindu people who are supporting Hindutva, they are trying to support constitution in the United States. So how does it affect the majority community? Thank you.
Oh, that it will be, if the constitution is changed the way they want to change it and replace it by Manusmriti or something, it will be a disaster. Right now, we have been thrown back by decades, then we will be thrown back by centuries, because to gain this constitution and a modern republic has been a struggle that has taken hundreds of years, implicitly, and 100 years explicitly. So that will make all the difference. Some of us in our younger activist days used to criticize this constitution as bourgeois constitution that must be overthrown. Now we know better. This constitution protects the individual, protects human rights, at least in words, and it is being subverted because it comes in the way of Manusmriti. And Manusmriti kind of ideology is that societies are permanently hierarchical, and most of the people, other than the Savarnas, they will have to live a second and third grade citizenship. That is what Manusmriti is. Their economic policy is, which they are implementing without changing the constitution, is that the all wealth of a society should be in the hands of handful of people, and most people should work hard to make a living. Otherwise, society will not be stable. So, we are talking of all those things. We are talking of opening the gates for the barbarians, and overturning everything. Now, in that, if we say that despite having this constitution, did Dalits become liberated? Did Muslims become equal? Did women become liberated? Now, that is where we have to understand that writing a constitution is one thing. Building an institution is one thing, and gaining popular support for constitution and institution is a very long drawn struggle. So we have to ask ourselves the question that if democratic and modern values are instituted in the institutions, whereas the democratic process is in the elections, and when elections come against the democratic values, when institutions themselves threaten to be overturned by popular support, then where do we stand? Do we stand with people, or do we stand with values? And that is a difficult question to answer. We leftists have always gone with the people, but people like me now appeal to pay more attention to values, even if people want to bring in sati pratha, even if people want to bring in child marriage or whichever social ill, no matter how large social support it gets, it must be opposed. And that is why you brought a very good point. Minorities and oppressed want this constitution because it is a protection. Otherwise, the majoritarian barbarians will overrun the minorities, will overrun their own members of their own communities. A patriarch will run over his family. Daughter will be run over by father. This it's individual that must be protected by the state in terms of its basic human rights, and not have communities which ensure that. Communities do not ensure.
All right.
Thank you.